guys, welcome back to another video. So to start off this video, I just want to kind of thank you guys for 1,000 subscribers. Didn't really think we were gonna kind of get there that quick, and this last week the channel kind of blew up off a little short I did on the yellow Miata. So if you haven't seen last video where I kind of did a full walk around on all the projects I got going on and you're kind of curious on anything I have going on, I kind of talked about it a little bit, and I also did build series on basically every project in here other than my yellow Miata, because I built that over the last 5 years. And so, but I want to appreciate you guys for that. But today's video, we're actually going to be working back on to the $40 new quad I just picked up. So if you haven't seen the video we did on actually picking this thing up, it's just to go check it out, kind of get updated where we're at. But we just spent a lot of time really just kind of working on the engine, fixing all the little gremlins with this thing, and heard it fire and kind of put off some starting fluid. And then after a while of jumping the starter solenoid, it ended up blowing up the starter. So at this point, we can't really even crank this thing over. So it kind of sucks, but after doing some thinking on it and kind of just all the little toys I have going on, like the 6 horsepowers on all the mini bikes and both of the quads already, I was just kind of more leaning on to kind of just swapping this thing just to make it 10 times easier. And it kind of gives me more into the realm I kind of know. But I wanted to build this bike, or this quad, into a drag quad, really. So slap on some nice slicks on the rear and maybe get some skinnies for the front and make this thing go pretty quick, like 60 to 80 is kind of the goal. So I want to swap on a little bit bigger motor instead of the 6 horsepower like the rest of the toys. I have this 11 horsepower Honda GX340 that's just been kind of sitting here. It does need some work. I think it's locked up from me letting it sit outside in the rain, but nothing really we haven't dealt with before. We dealt with a lot worse around here, but I want to really try to get this motor out here and try to test fit that thing. I know just looking at it, it's not going to fit at all. We're going to have to do some weird way. We're actually going to have to reverse the motor rotation and actually have the head go forward instead of it going back on all the other toys. Do some gearing to kind of switch the gearing to actually make it drive forward instead of backwards and all that. So I want to just play around with kind of fitting up some engines in there today. And worst case, we'll go with a 6 horsepower that's hopped up. I want to really build like a badass little 6 horsepower motor that kind of makes some good power. So that might be something in the future if we can't get the 11 horsepower to fit. But I'm going to really try to get the 11 horsepower to fit in here, just because I think this quad is the biggest quad out of all 3 I have so far. And I think it'll fit a little bit better for everything we're trying to do with this setup. So let's get to work, tear this thing down. Probably just time lapse it for you guys and get this old motor out of here. Should be pretty easy. Couple nuts and bolts and just pulling off a bunch of wiring and a few hoses and stuff. So I'm not really too sure how long that time lapse was last night getting the engine out of the ATV here, but we finally got it out, and after a good bit of fight, and I got it here on the ground. I basically left everything all connected as much as possible, so basically could put this in anything else, wire it up a little bit, and have a running kind of 125 motor for something. So I'm gonna keep that for now, but now that we got a bare frame, we can start test fitting some motors in here and getting a good idea of how this thing's looking. I ended up just getting pretty late last night, so I kind of just called it a night, kind of start off with a fresh mindset and kind of start off playing with some things like actually fitting up the 11 horsepower motor and just doing some rough measurements real quick. It is going to be real tight in here. I don't really plan on the motor having any movement back and forth, since we're going to end up running a jack shaft and doing all that to make it line up to the axle. but just looking at it real quick, it is real tight in here, and I might need to chop out this big old motor mount bracket for the 125, and this stuff is real thick, so that's not really gonna be too fun. Luckily, I noticed that the seat here kind of all unbolts, so basically this whole frame unbolts, which is kind of nice because I can unbolt little pieces here and there to get in there a little bit better. But I at least want to pull off the intake and exhaust and gas tank as well off this motor and just try to rough fit it inside this frame and see what it's looking like. If we need to start chopping some stuff, we can. We're gonna get the gas tank pulled off there so we don't have any grinding sparks around there. But other than that, just start test fitting the motors. If the 11 horsepower doesn't fit, I am planning on doing a 6 horsepower instead. If that doesn't fit, that's kind of second case scenario, but I do have a 6 horsepower over here, or I might end up snagging the one off this Profit mini bike and kind of do a little switcheroo with these two. To kind of talk about that later, but I kind of just want to, if anything, put a 6 horsepower in it. We'll build a 6 horsepower up, make it a little bit hopped up motor, make like 10 to 12 horsepower, and it should be pretty much exact as the 11 horsepower, but in a little bit smaller frame. So let's get to work, test fit some motors in here, and see what we're gonna end up deciding with. So I got the 11 horsepower motor all stripped down. I got the exhausted intake over here and the gas tank as well. And then I brought the block over here by the frame, just kind of get a better idea of how everything's gonna look, and also tossing it up in there a few times. But after doing some measurements on this thing and just actually trying to put it inside the frame here, this thing is basically, it's not gonna say it's impossible to get it fit in there, but it's definitely gonna be a lot more work than I would want to do. You're definitely doing a lot of modification to the frame, and also just trying to get the motor to fit in there with a jack shaft. And the way I would have it with the head shooting forward, we need to reverse the rotation of the engine to actually get it to spin forward and drive forward. So it's kind of just gonna be a little too much work and kind of overcomplicate this whole project to get a couple extra horsepower when we could easily modify a 6 horsepower to make the same power. So I ended up just pulling down a little 6 horsepower I had in the shed over there, or on the shelf over there, and gonna strip this thing down real quick just to bare block maybe the gas tank still, just because it's still got gas in it, and just kind of get an idea of how that's actually gonna fit up in here. Probably gonna fit a lot better just because of how small of a package the little 6 horsepowers are and all the other toys. So I think it's gonna fit a lot better in here. So that's kind of gonna be our option and what I'm thinking. So let's get it tossed up in here and see how it looks. But I'm thinking we're gonna end up doing the 6 horsepower and then hopping that motor up to maybe 10 to 12 horsepower, which should pretty much equal 11 horsepower and give us all the power we're gonna need, and let us fit up a few little things, maybe like a torque converter or a jack shaft with a bunch of gearing to make this thing actually go fast. I hate doing these bunch of little 1-minute clips, but I kind of got to show you guys. So here's the 11 horsepower, and then here's the stripped down 6 horsepower. You can see the size comparison there. The 6 horsepower is way smaller inside to the 11 horsepower, which you can pretty much guess by just the horsepower rating. But even with this thing stripped as it is, this thing is still not going to fit inside this frame here with the motor mount from the 125 up here on the neck. The valve cover is just barely hitting it, so I'm gonna end up having to pull off the little seat brace here in the gas tank, and I would like to try and chop it off as close to the frame here, but I might just kind of short it just a little bit just to get an idea of where the motor's actually going to sit, and then we can clean it all up later once we actually paint this thing in the near future. But then once we actually get the motor in there, we can start measuring it up for the engine plate and all that. So enough talking, let's get this thing stripped down, start chopping on it, and finally get a motor fitted up in this thing finally. It is so hot. So in Florida's fashion, I ended up pouring outside, but after the rain stopped, I ended up pulling the quad outside, as you guys saw, and got the motor mount all chopped out of there. And it definitely wasn't really too fun, especially how thick these things are. So eventually got those things knocked out of there, and as you can tell, got a 6 horsepower mocked up in there. I'm not gonna lie, this thing does look kind of cool without the seat bracket on there, so I just kind of had to say that. It kind of looks like a little ride-on jet ski or like ride-on ATV that you don't sit down on. I don't know, I think it might be kind of a weird option, but got the 6 horsepower kind of mocked up in here, got a little piece of wood underneath there, kind of level it all out, and I kind of got it mocked in place with where a torque converter setup would be or a clutch setup, so it's kind of how it would sit in the frame. It is basically almost center with the whole block and head and all that. I will say this quad is definitely the hardest quad I had to fit an engine up into. If you look at the other 2 quads I have, you can see they have 2 bars going down on each side of the engine, while this one actually has like a whole center neck that actually comes from the front here and just goes all the way down, so it's just one big centerpiece, and it really interrupts with the head here and even the spark plug, a little ignition boot stuff. So we might even need to put like a little 90 on that just to get that to clear. But other than that, 6 horsepower fits in here pretty solid, so I just got to order up an engine plate, and I got to decide if I'm going to use a torque converter or a clutch setup with this. I did decide I'm going to just use that motor for mock-up because this motor has a 3/4 shaft on the Profit mini bike, so it'll be a little bit easier to modify in the end, and then we can just kind of put that motor on this one, do a little switcheroo, get that motor and put into this thing, actually build up in the future. We will build it just as is, kind of stock 6 horsepower motor with a couple of upgrades and see how it does, and then later on we'll actually build up the motor and then kind of compare it to it stock to upgraded and built and all that, make its power. But other than that, pretty good. I want to hear you guys' decision if I should use a torque converter or clutch on this setup. I'm thinking clutch just because I'm trying to go for a good top speed, but I do want this thing to have good low end because I do like cruise my toys around the neighborhood once in a while, so I don't really want this thing to be kind of a pain to get taken off and stuff. So other than that, it's pretty much the end of today's video. I got to order up some parts so we can actually get to work on this thing and get those on the way. And in the meantime, we'll start working on any other toys. I think I might work on the Yellow Miata this weekend or something. But other than that, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Back on the $40 quad and figuring out what engine we're actually gonna fit into it. I wish I could use the 11 horsepower, but hey, we got it, so we can use it for another project in the future. I might even slap this back on the go-kart just to get the go-kart back alive, so you might see that coming up. But other than that, that's gonna be it today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, hope you like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned for more content, and peace out.